Next up, we have a special presentation for you from John Lott, the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. And if you are unfamiliar with John Lott and his book, More Guns, Less Crime, which I doubt, you can go pick up a copy out in the hallway during one of the breaks. So everyone, John Lott. Can I have the mic?
Well, it's great to be back here again. I greatly appreciate being invited. Obviously, this is a very important conference that we all have. So I wanted to talk today, let's see, we got about kind of a lot of the misinformation that we see coming out of the government and the media. When I worked in the federal government during the first Trump administration, one thing I'd often get asked is, how is it possible that you could have the FBI going and spying on a presidential campaign and not having leaks or whistleblowers? And there's a pretty simple answer for that, and that is if everybody agrees with everybody else politically, it's not too surprising that you can have something like that happen. Now, I can't personally speak about the FBI generally, but I did get to deal a fair amount with the data people at the FBI. And it's pretty much true, is from what I could tell, that they're all true believers. Now, one thing you have to understand is how important it is, the data that comes out of the government, because the people who control the data, basically they can control the political debate that we have. And we see a lot of what happened during the just the campaign last year. I just want to give you what I think is a particularly egregious example with regard to crime data from the FBI before I get into more specific things about gun control stuff. And you know, during last year, you saw one headline after another, like NPR would say, violent crime is dropping, but people mistakenly think that violent crime is increasing. You know, the New York Times, Washington Post, all sorts of other places had that headline last year. And it was based on the FBI crime data that they put out each year. And what you have to understand is that that data comes out with a year lag. So the data for 2022 came out in October 2023. The data for 2023 came out in September of last year. And so, like during the presidential debate last year between Trump and Kamala Harris, where Trump was talking about violent crime going up and he was being corrected by David Muir from ABC, Muir was relying on the FBI crime data from 2022 as the only final data that was available then when he was making that statement. Now, the original data that came out for 2022 showed a slight drop in violent crime, about 2.1%. When they put out the data last September, they updated the data for 2022, but they made no mention of that in their press release. If you actually read the report that the FBI put out, there's only one footnote in there where they say that they had updated the data for 2022. No mention why they had updated it, no mention about how things had changed in terms of the numbers that were there. And rather than a 2.1% drop, the revised data that they had showed a 4.5% increase. So all those headlines that they had over the course of the previous year were wrong because they were claiming they were using the old 2022 data. But the problem is that I only discovered this because, being the nerd that I am, I'm working on a Saturday night and looking at some Excel files and say, look, it looks like they changed the things there. And but 99% of reporters, they just look at the press release. And even if the first time I looked at the report, I had missed the footnote there, and I wouldn't have thought it was very important because all they say they've updated. They didn't say it went from a drop to an increase. And the thing is, even when even when reporters started reaching out to the FBI last year before the election refused to explicitly come out and say, yeah, the data showed an increase. All they would say is, we stand by our data. But they refused to make an explicit statement that it had gone from a drop to an increase, because then it would have been newsworthy. And, I honestly believe that they wanted to help the Democrats there. And one of the big themes was what's happening to crime. Now, there's also some problems with the media here, because the media just refused to look at anything other than the FBI data on reported crimes. And you have to understand there's two measures that the government has of crime. One is crimes reported to police, okay? And then there's a measure of total crimes. If it seems to me, I care more about what's happening to total crime than crimes that are reported to police. You may not know this, but about 40% of violent crimes are reported to police. About 30% of property crimes are reported to police. And prior to 2020, those numbers tend to go up and down together. But since then, they've really moved in quite opposite directions in a number of different years that we have here. And there's lots of reasons that I can go and give you for it. But the National Crime Victimization Survey, which surveys about 240,000 people each year, has kind of been considered the gold standard. But last year during the campaign, not only did we have these problems with the FBI, but the media, despite Trump going and explicitly referencing the National Crime Victimization Survey and me having a piece in the Wall Street Journal and other places, the general media just refused to go and mention it. I'll just show you the difference between these two. So the orange shows you what happened with regard to the FBI data on crimes reported to police. The blue shows you the changes year to year in total violent crime. In the first 3 years, because we only have the data for the first 3 years of the Biden administration right now, we had the largest total percentage increase in violent crime over any 3-year period of time since they started collecting this data over 50 years ago. So when people are saying we think crime's increasing, if you look at total crime, it looks like they were right with regard to that. And you can see the differences. The largest previous increase over 3 years was in 2006, and it was 27%. So this was more than twice as large. Now, I want to get into some gun stuff now, just to kind of give the idea of kind of the general biases that might exist in terms of the FBI data. When I was working in the Department of Justice, I was senior advisor for research and statistics. One of the tasks that I had was to go and look at the FBI active shooting reports. These reports they put out every year. They get a fair amount of media attention. And an active shooting case is a gun fired in public, not part of some other type of crime like a gang fight over drug turf or a robbery, anything from one person being shot at and missed all the way up to a mass public shooting. And the media, as I say, covers this a lot. You'll see quotes from places like the AP saying, quote, "It's rare in the U.S. for active shooters to be stopped by a bystander." Or from the Washington Post, "Rampage in Indiana, a rare instance of armed civilian ending a mass shooting." New York Times, many other publications I could give you, they all have the same thing, and it's all from these FBI active shooting reports. And just here's the data you can see here just roughly. The first couple columns are the FBI data showing the total number of active shooting cases. And then the second column there, which ends in 14, is the number of times that they say civilians have stopped these shootings, a person with a permanent concealed handgun. It's about 4%. So over 300 active shooting cases, only 14 of those are stopped by civilians. I'm going to just show you. So we went back, and I started doing this when I was back working at the Department of Justice. didn't have millions of dollars to go and do this, so I make no claim that I've gotten all the cases that civilians stopping these things. But rather than 14, I think it's 202 for the years 2014 to 2024. And so it's about 36% of all the active shooting cases were stopped by armed civilians. And, the most depressing thing is I can understand people missing these news stories, even if they spend millions of dollars trying to track them down. But when you get somebody to say, here's the list of the ones that you've missed, and they still don't correct it years later, even when you get them to admit that they'd missed those cases, to me, that's going a step further. And so rather than 4%, I think it's about 36%. But there's one thing you need to know that I also argued with the FBI people when I was there. And I said, look, guys, if you're going to look at civilians stopping these cases, you have to differentiate between gun-free zones where it's illegal for them to carry versus other places. We're talking about law-abiding citizens carrying these permanent concealed handguns. If you're talking about law-abiding citizens, you can only expect them to stop attacks in places where it's legal for them to go and carry. And so if you just take the data for 2024, the FBI claims that there were 0 cases last year where civilians who are legally carrying stopped active shooting cases. I think it's about 48%, okay? And nobody needs to take my word for it. On our website at crimeresearch.org, we have the cases. We have links to the underlying news stories so you can go and check them yourselves. But when you break it out and say, well, how much did they stop in places where they were legally able to carry? It's about 63%. That's a lot different than 0. And so anyway, we try to make a difference on these things. Now, I could go through the media responses. I'm going to skip this right now. But what I want to try to do is talk to you about some new research that we have. Because what we did recently with Carl Moody, who's our research director for the Crime Prevention Research Center, he's a professor at William and Mary. We did a deep dive into all the active shooting cases over the last 11 years. And what we found, I thought was pretty startling. And that is, I don't think people appreciate what an incredibly difficult job police officers who are in uniform have in stopping active shooting cases. So let's say you're going to be one of these criminals who's going to go and shoot people in a place, and you see a police officer there who's in uniform. What options do you have? You have real tactical advantages. You can either wait for the officer to leave the area before you attack, or you can move on to another target yourself. Or if you're going to insist on doing the attack there, who are you going to shoot first? You're going to shoot the officer first. So what we found was that civilians actually stopped a greater percentage of these active shooting cases than the police did. And that's partly for a couple of reasons. One, these first tactical advantages that I mentioned, okay, and the fact that they're going to many times avoid places where the police who are in uniform are. It also has to do with just simple numbers of police. We have like 650,000 police officers in the United States. Less than a third are on duty at any point in time, so you have about 200,000 to go and guard a population of 340 million people. That's asking a lot for those officers that are there, okay? But on top of that, compare that to civilians. So we have 21.5 million concealed carry permit holders in the United States. And we've done surveys of it. When you include constitutional carry, you're talking about 15% of American adults carry either all or most of the time. That's a lot more people than you're going to have for police officers that are there. Plus the fact that they're not in uniform makes it very difficult for the types of tactical changes, to avoid areas where a permit holder is, because you don't know they're there until you actually do the attack. The other thing that we found that I think was probably the most startling to me was that how often police die in stopping these attacks. Because even though they stopped a fewer number of attacks than civilians do, police were 7 times more likely to get killed in stopping active shooting cases than civilians are. People need to appreciate what a difficult job it is to have somebody in uniform. It's kind of like they have a neon sign above them that says, "Shoot me first." One way when I go and talk to people about this that I try to explain it is I said, look, we have armed air marshals on planes. How many of you think that air marshals ought to be in uniform? Don't everybody think that would be a good idea? Why don't you think it'd be a good idea to have air marshals in uniform? If you have an air marshal in uniform and you happen to have a terrorist there on the plane, who do you think the terrorist is going to go after first? Because he knows if he neutralizes that one person there, he's going to have, it's going to be a lot easier for him to go and take over the plane that's there. One argument that I've had with a number of conservatives over time is that they want to go and have uniformed, school resource officers at schools. And I've tried to say, look, if you're going to have an officer at a school, please don't put them in uniform. Make them the PE coach, make them a staff member there at the school, have them blend in, have it so that nobody there knows who it is that's actually armed. What you want to do is, rather than a sign from the school, have a sign from the school that says, "Warning, select teachers and staff at the school are carrying concealed," so people won't know who it is that's going to be able to go and stop them. Now, there's other biases I could go into. I'm not going to go into here. Now, there's one thing I want to talk to you about, and it's probably my biggest pet peeve with regard to the media, and that is anybody who follows our work on our website or subscribes to our emails knows how we collect statements from the diaries and manifestos from these mass murderers about how they plan their attacks. And time after time, they make it explicit about trying to pick an area where they know their victims can't defend themselves. It's the same story time after time in these cases. You have people who are suicidal, but they want to get media attention. They feel unappreciated. And they know the more people they kill, the more media attention that they're going to get. And they know that if they go to a place where their victims can't defend themselves, they're going to be able to go and kill more people and get more media attention. So this isn't rocket science. But the thing is that just drives me nuts is that even though they make this explicit time after time, and for those who have seen our stuff on our website, we have literally dozens of quotes from these mass murderers over times where they make this explicit, the media just refuses to cover those parts of their statements. So you have somebody like the Minneapolis school shooter that we just had. You'll see all sorts of news articles speculating. So, well, maybe he did it because his mom used to work at the school. It's possible, but he doesn't say that. What he says is, and they'll say things like, he talks a lot about other school shooters or other mass shooters. And that's true, he does. But how does he talk about them? He talks about them because what he's learned from them, and what he's learned from them is to go to a place where he knows victims can't defend themselves. In that case, the quote is, and this, he has multiple discussions. He says, "I recently heard a rumor that James Holmes, the Aurora theater shooter, may have chosen venues that were, quote, gun-free zones, end quote. I probably would aim the same way. Holmes wanted to make sure his victims would be unarmed. That's why I and others like schools so much. At least for me, I'm focused on them. Adam Lanza is my reason." And, we could go on. And he even talked about the time of day of the attack. He didn't want to do it in the morning when parents were dropping off kids at school. He didn't want to do it in the afternoon when they're picking them up because he was worried that one of the parents might have a concealed carry permit. So it's like the amount of detail there, and yet the media just completely refuses to mention this. And there are other cases from the Nashville school shooter or the Buffalo mass murder. Even going back to Columbine, there's references there that indicate that at least they were very cognizant of it, though it's not as explicit as a lot of these other statements that are there. But my guess is the whole gun control debate that we have right now would be dramatically different if even once in a while the media would have said, and by the way, this person explained why he picked the target that he did. He wanted to go to a gun-free zone. Instead, we have politicians who want to go and pass things like background checks on the private transfers of guns. There's not one mass public shooting this century that would have been stopped if such a law had been in effect and been perfectly enforced. I think I'm out of time here. But anyway, I greatly appreciate you guys being here. One thing I will say, if you don't mind, and that is, it doesn't do us any good to put this data together unless you guys kind of use it. And so if you could go to our website and just sign up for our emails, I've spent 90-hour weeks putting this stuff together. But, as I say, if you guys don't know about these things, to go and argue and inform other people, it's kind of a waste of my time. And the emails are free. Just out of curiosity, how many people get our emails? Well, that's pretty good. Keep your hands up. How many people think it's useful? Okay, even more go up. I don't know. But anyway, all right. Thank you very much for your time.